Welcome back. So we've got plates moving around. We have evidence and information. It started off as this idea of continental drift. Now with evidence, information, a mechanism to drive everything. Now we've finally hit plate tectonic theory, highest level of knowing, unifying theory of geology. So as plates move around, one way they interact is at divergent boundaries, where one plate and another plate are moving away from each other. They're diverging. So on this map, it's a very simplified map of the Earth's crust. Divergent plate boundaries are these blue areas. Again, oftentimes at mid-oceanic ridges, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, but in a number of different places. Every once in a while, we'll get some of these creep onto land, but for the most part, divergent boundaries are found in the ocean at spreading ridges. And again, it's occurring where plates are spreading kind of from spreading apart, and new, for the most part, oceanic lithosphere is forming. The crust in these areas is extended, it's thinned and fractured, which allows magma to kind of push its way up and fill in the gap to create brand new crust. The magma originates from partial melting of the mantle. Remember, the mantle material is mostly solid. Remember I said it's like hot Play-Doh mixed with rocks. But as you thin out the crust, you relieve some of the pressure. A change in pressure changes the dynamics of the material, and it makes it a little bit easier to melt. So the magma helps to melt overlying crust, which then kind of fills in that gap to create new rock, new oceanic crust at these spreading ridges. Oftentimes that magma is basaltic and creates an extrusive igneous rock called basalt. More on that in a later unit. This basaltic magma is very flowy and runny, and it can get into vertical fractures in and around the spreading ridges, and those are known as dikes. The cracks in rock that are filled by magma that cools are known as dikes if they're vertical, and sills if they're horizontal. Or this magma is extruded as lava flows onto the ocean floor. Divergent boundaries have successive injections of magma as plates continue to move apart. Something's got to fill in that gap, cools and solidifies, and forms new oceanic crusts. Again, remember, it records the intensity and orientation, the direction of Earth's magnetic field. And these boundaries are most, again, commonly at oceanic ridges such as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. These ridges have very rugged topography. They're underneath the ocean, so we had to use mapping to figure it out, but they have very rugged topography along the kind of ridge itself. And at divergent boundaries, we tend to have some earthquakes. Earthquakes is when parts of the earth are kind of moving relative to one another, and they kind of rub up against each other and release some energy. So we have very shallow depth earthquakes, and they're not very strong. If you're interested in that kind of stuff, I suggest Geology 101 or 110, which we offer here at Estrella Mountain Community College. Also at divergent boundaries on the bottom of the seafloor, as it extrudes this very runny basaltic lava, ridges also have these things called basaltic pillow lavas. They kind of look like fluffy pillows all piled together. This distinctive shape happens as a result from underwater eruptions of this very flowy basaltic magma or lava. So if you see some of this stuff on land, you can say, oh, at one point this must have been some sort of spreading center on the bottom of the seafloor, but now it's up here on dry land. I wonder how that happened. Plate tectonics. So, divergent boundaries aren't only in the bottoms of the oceans. They can appear on continents as well during the early stages of continental breakup. Beneath the continent, there might be some magma welling up in these anomalous mantle plume areas. More on that in a bit. And the crust is initially kind of pushed up, and then it's stretched and thinned out. Here's a little image of that magma kind of pushing up, pushing the crust up, kind of thins it out a little bit, stretches it a little bit, and then cracks might begin to appear in this continental crust. if that's the case, then we can start to create something on land, on continental crust, called a rift valley. During this stage, magma typically intrudes into the fractures and flow into the valley floor. So kind of where this continental crust is cracking, lava flows onto the floor and solidifies. Great example of a rift valley is the East African Rift Valley. Maybe you heard about it on, I don't know, The Lion King or any number of movies or documentaries. So this is kind of what we see happening in areas of Africa in the Great Rift Valley. So here is the rift itself, continuing all the way through. You can see off in the distance. So this is the rift occurring in Africa, and hot lava material kind of filling in this area and filling in the gaps. So that's current rifting, but there's also ancient rifting that occurs as well. So the features we're looking for on land that can indicate, oh, this is an ancient area of rifting, might include faults, which are breaks and movements of large pieces of the Earth's crust. Dikes, as mentioned previously, as well as sills. We can also look for possible specific types of lava flows, like pillow basalts, as well as thick sedimentary sequences within rift valleys that can indicate rifting, movement apart along continental crust. Another example of this, an ancient rifting, is the Triassic fault block basin in the eastern U.S., which shows rifting between North America and Africa after Pangaea began to break up. Pangaea being a supercontinent that was, all the continents on land, on Earth, were connected. These areas contain thousands of meters, many kilometers of continental sediment that's been broken off as these plates are moving apart, and have a bunch of cracks which magma has intruded into. So there's a lot of dikes, vertical igneous intrusions, and sills, horizontal igneous intrusions. So we see a lot of that along the East Coast. That's where North America and Africa were split apart. Great example, the Palisades in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey. We see these horizontal sills where this rifting occurs. As rifting continues, as spreading continues on land, some rift valleys will continue to lengthen and deepen until the crust eventually breaks and drops a little bit, allowing possibly oceanic water to kind of form in that area. So you might have a sea formed in that area, now separating two continental crust blocks. A great example of that is the Red Sea in between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, or the Gulf of California, kind of down where Rocky Point is, between Mexico mainland and Baja. So again, continue rifting, the center continues to fall, water kind of intrudes in that area. Again, the Red Sea here between Saudi Arabia and Egypt is another great example of rifting that's gone far enough to where kind of the ocean kind of moved in to create the Red Sea. As that process continues to happen, the ocean can eventually fully creep its way in. So as that narrow sea continues to spread, it may eventually become an expansive ocean basin, like the Atlantic has. It started off with in North America and Africa connected, and then as those two things rifted apart and traveled further and further and further apart, here we are today with the Atlantic Ocean. Oh, look, that's the example. Yeah, a little bit of the diagram there. Oftentimes we kind of see these staggered kind of divergent boundaries intermixed with transform boundaries. A little bit more on that in a later video, but that's kind of what we see once we mapped the seafloor. For instance, here's again the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So again, you see it's not a perfect spreading center. There's little pieces that are kind of moved here and moved there, but all in all we do have general spreading and things pushing out on either side. Before we go, let me give you another part of the super secret code. It is the number 5. You got me, the number 5. One more time, the number 5. Okay, so let's pause here. When we come back, we just talked about divergent boundaries. Let's talk about convergent boundaries. See you back here in just a second.